excited. I am Lilian Ramirez from Seagram, Puerto Rico. I am gonna be moderating this session number 3, sorry about that. And in this session, we are gonna learn about all the process related to the 5th National Climate Assessment. This dynamic session will include a facilitated session with all the speakers, in which all the participants will have the opportunity to offer input on the priorities and context for the Southeast and the Caribbean chapters. I'm going to be brief, and I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Alison Cremens. She is a climate scientist detailed from the EPA's Office of Air and Radiation, and also she is the director of the 5th National Climate Assessment. Alison, I will, okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can you hear me okay? Okay, excellent. All right, so thank you for having me here today. I was hoping to provide a little bit of context before handing it over to Jeremy and Pablo to talk about their chapters within the National Climate Assessment. So I'm going to give a little bit of history and legal structure behind the development of this report. I'll talk about what a climate assessment is broadly and the goals of NCA 5 specifically. And then I'm going to end with our timeline and some other opportunities where you can be involved. Next slide, please. So starting with a acronym that can sometimes be hard to remember, the U.S. Global Change Research Program, or USGCRP. The USGCRP was codified in 1990 in the Global Change Research Act, and as part of that act, Congress mandates that we assist the nation and the world to understand, assess, predict, and respond to global change. The 13 federal member agencies of the 13 federal member agencies of the U.S. Global Change Research Program are tasked with coordinating climate change research across the government and providing that information to decision makers who are facing risk management questions under a changing climate. Next slide, please. So one of the most important ways we do this is through the National Climate Assessment, or NCA. That's probably another acronym you're going to hear today. The Global Change Research Act instructs the U.S. Global Change Research Program to assess the observed and projected impacts of climate change on the U.S., to synthesize, evaluate, and interpret scientific research, and then to produce a national climate assessment every 4 years. In that second item on the screen there, you'll see that the Act specifically calls out a number of topics that we have to cover with the National Climate Assessment. Things like agriculture and land use and ecosystems and health. And those are the topics that you'll see align with our national chapters in the table of contents that I'll be showing you later. In addition to those national chapters, the NCA includes 10 regional chapters, like the ones you'll be hearing from today, which cover all of those topics, but within a region specific to the United States. And finally, you'll see that the National Climate Assessment is tasked with looking at what climate changes have happened or are happening around us right now, as well as projections of risk into the future. And we are tasked with thinking across timescales that reach from our lifetime to our children's or grandchildren's lifetime. Next slide, please. So I talked about our mandate a little bit, why we write the National Climate Assessment. On this next slide that I'm hoping is coming up, I wanted to talk about what an assessment is more broadly and why it might differ from another kind of scientific research paper or another kind of report you might be familiar with. Can we advance the slide one more, please? I don't know if that's Lillian or Meredith. Are you able to advance the slide?
Hold on just one moment. We must be having a difficulty. I am jumping in, and I will share your slide in just 1 second, please.
Sure. Excellent. That is the one. All right.
Great.
Thank you so much. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about why an assessment is a little different from other kinds of research papers or government reports. So this first item on the slide here goes back to that mandate from Congress I mentioned, that we integrate, evaluate, and interpret climate science. The authors who write these reports, like Jeremy and Pablo that you'll be speaking with later, they are brought on board because of their ability to not just summarize the science, but for their capacity to look across a really wide body of literature, to weigh the findings and make really hard choices about what rises to be included in their chapter and what doesn't. They are asked to interpret the state of the science for our readers and apply their best professional judgment to come to a consensus and convey how certain we are of those findings. So by reporting not just what the impacts are, but how confident we are in them and how likely they are to occur, an assessment is a risk management tool that can inform actions or policy. However, it does not prescribe or advocate for any specific policy. It is policy neutral and policy relevant. And no matter what version or volume of the National Climate Assessment we're working on, we ascribe to these principles and must ensure that the assessments are authoritative, timely, and compliant. Next slide, please. So those are the general principles of what an assessment is. I wanted to talk about how we want to write this assessment, the priorities for the 5th National Climate Assessment, or NCA 5. And these 5 overlapping goals for this assessment has been communicated to our leadership, to our author team, to the staff, with the mission of making NCA 5 the best assessment to date. So I wanted to be sure to communicate them with you here so that you can all help keep us accountable for reaching these goals. The first priority for NCA 5 is to advance the conversation. We want this report to build on, but not repeat, the bedrock of authoritative science that was established in previous assessments. So we're going to be focusing on what is new and where the science has advanced since NCA 4. The second priority is that we want NCA 5 to improve the accessibility of climate science to a broader audience, particularly those seeking authoritative, approachable information to make decisions right now about the climate risks they're facing. The third priority is that we're encouraging our authors to be creative in their communication. We want NCA 5 to leverage the power of art and storytelling to better convey the climate science that people need to act, to create memorable methods of communicating the science that lets people put themselves into their own climate story. The fourth priority is to make it about people. So we are gathering diverse voices and perspectives, including all of you right here, to improve the relevance of the information we're delivering. We want to show how people are already being affected by climate impacts, but also highlight the valuable actions that communities are already taking to mitigate and adapt. And finally, we want NCA 5 to be useful and usable. So we don't want to just better describe the climate crisis. We want to provide valuable context that people need to make risk management choices, including why is the climate changing and how it's affecting people and who is most vulnerable and what can be done. Next slide, please. So this is our list of chapters here. I will just mention a few items on them pretty quickly, but they're all available on our website for more information. The second and the third chapter, so the Earth System Processes and the Climate Trends chapter, are our physical science chapters. So those are the chapters that we'll be looking at advances in things like climate sensitivity, temperature, precipitation, sea level rise, modeling, all of those observed and projected trends of climate drivers. The rest of the chapters on this slide are what we call our national chapters. And so they are looking across the United States, but within a specific sector or group of people. I'll point out the last 2 items on the list that are starred there. These are new chapters in NCA 5 that were not in NCA 4. So we are introducing a new chapter on economics and one on human social systems. Next slide, please. The other half of our table of contents includes all of our regional chapters, like the ones we'll be talking about today. So we have 10 regions that will be talking about all of the topics you saw on the previous slide, but specific to each of those areas within the United States. And this has been a really helpful tool to get back to those priorities about making it about people and reaching a broad audience, because the authors of those chapters often come from those regions themselves or live and work within those regions themselves. So it's really great that we get to have all of those voices from around the country developing those chapters. And finally, we have 2 chapters on responses, one on adaptation and one on mitigation. Next slide, please. So I've given you a little bit of the who, what, why, and how of the NCA. I'll end with some information on where we've come and where we've gone. And I especially want to highlight some more opportunities for engagement here. So this is one slide that shows the progress that we've made to date. And if you can believe it, this work began about 2 years ago with the formation of a steering committee. We pulled together our chapter leads and our coordinating leads, and then those chapter leads pulled together their full author team over the course of the summer and fall of last year. In September, we held our first meeting of all of the authors of NCA 5, more than 450 people from all around the country, from Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands and Guam and Palau, and I think 1 or 2 from Canada as well. So, and 48 of the states. So we have a pretty great representation from all around the United States. Their first task, the first task of those authors, was to pull together an annotated outline of their chapter. And that brings us to where we are right now. We are taking public comment on those draft outlines and also hosting a series of public engagement workshops similar to this one, where we are hoping to discuss the scope and approach of those chapters with stakeholders and people who are interested in the different topics or regions. Next slide, please. So thinking about where we are headed, we're also about 2 years out from the release of NCA 5. But to make sure that this is an authoritative, credible, and robust assessment, it has to go through a lot of rounds of reviews and revisions between now and then. So if you're looking over the next 2 years, you'll see that each of the chapters will be going through 2 public comment periods, including the one that's going on right now. It will go through multiple agency and technical reviews, and then a peer review by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. And after all of those reviews, the authors must respond to every single agency comment, every public comment, and every peer review comment. And based on all of that input, revise their chapters before finally, at the end of 2023 and after the last round of agency reviews and clearance, the 5th National Climate Assessment is expected to be released at the end of 2023, which is where my slide ends here. But of course, that's just the beginning of our communication and outreach. So I hope this group will also be helpful in distributing this report when it is finally released. Next slide, please. So I wanted to end with just a couple of opportunities for engagement here. The first one, when we released the Federal Register notice in 2020 that took public comment on the prospectus for NCA 5 and called for nominations for authors, that announcement that went out in 2020 also opened an ongoing call for technical inputs. So that is still open right now and on our website. If people have papers or resources that they want the NCA authors to consider, they can submit them there. Happening right now is our public comment on the zero order drafts, or what we call zero order drafts, others call annotated outlines, and our public engagement workshops, which I'll mention on my last slide, which is next. And finally, I don't want you to miss a few other opportunities for engagement that are coming up this year. The first one is that we have a public call for review editors. So those are folks who make sure that all of those comments that we received get an adequate response, and those responses are reflected in the chapter. We also have our third order draft, which will be the first time we're releasing a full complete draft of the report at the end of this year. So that's a really critical time for people to submit public comments on the full draft of the report later this fall. And if you don't want to remember those dates, but you want to stay up to date, we have a newsletter that will make sure that you don't miss those opportunities. So next slide, please. So this is the public engagement opportunity that's going on right now. If you look at the bottom of this slide, you have the website globalchange.gov/NCA5. That's going to be your one-stop shop for all of the information, whether to submit a written comment or look at our agenda of public engagement workshops. We actually have 32, I think the slide says 30, but we have 32 public engagement workshops. We're about halfway through the 6-week period. So those workshops and the public comment will be ongoing through February 20th. They are free and open to the public, and like this event, it's an opportunity for us to hear from people like you and from our stakeholders, and let those people speak directly with our authors to help get an understanding of how you use these reports and what's important to you and how we can improve them and make them better. So let me end there, and I will hand it back to Lillian. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Alison. I don't see any questions on the chat, so I will going to move forward. So we are going to start our facilitated session with our next two speakers. First, we're going to have Dr. Jeremy Hoffman he's a scientist from the Science Museum of Virginia, and he's also the lead for the National Climate Assessment for the Southeast chapter. And we will also have Dr. Paulo Mendez-Lazaro from the University of Puerto Rico, and the lead for the Caribbean chapter of the NCA5, and he's Puerto Rican as me. So, all right, okay.
Jeremy, you should have the ability to share your screen. There you go.
There it goes. I was just switching screens. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jeremy Hoffman. I'm the David and Jane Cohn scientist at the Science Museum of Virginia, coming to you live from beautiful Richmond, Virginia. It is quite cold, but nice and sunny. I suspect for those of us joining from the Caribbean, it is much more enjoyable temperature than here. And this weekend we are set to drop into very cold conditions for our area. So it's a really important time to be talking about this resilience question. And we're, speaking for my author team for the Southeast chapter. We're so excited to get to engage with you and to share the stage here for the regional or for the SCDRP meeting with our Caribbean author team partners. And Pablo, the chapter lead, and I are really fortunate to have this opportunity. So what we're going to do right now is engage you in a bit of a thinking survey. So if you would, you can use either your smartphone to scan that QR code like a food menu at your favorite outdoor dining location. No technology had a bigger glow up during the pandemic than the QR code. Or you can follow the link that will be coming in the chat directly to this, to menti.com, and entering the code 88547569. So we'll give you just a few minutes to join. I see 71 folks on the attendee list, and about, well, if you would let us know that you're in by clicking the little heart icon on your screen. That'll help us know how many folks have joined. Oh, okay, there we go. Maybe we didn't quite some people weren't hitting the heart, which I understand. And so we'll give you about 2 minutes per question, 2 to 3 minutes per question here to respond. And what we'll be doing is, what's good about this is that we will be able to incorporate this as direct feedback and inspiration to guide how our author teams react to the public engagement workshops, which I understand the Caribbean chapter has already done one, I think, and the Southeast chapter engagement workshops are coming up next week. So this will be really exciting. All right. If you haven't yet, click that heart. Let us know you're in the Mentimeter. If you are still joining, you'll be able to have a chance to catch up here on this first question, which is really just about telling us a little bit more about the distribution of folks that are on this call. So if you would, using this map that was adapted from the Southeastern chapter of the climate assessment when they were combined, if you just tap on the screen, where are you reporting from? This is cool. I love being able to see where this is coming from. Pablo, did you want to read the question also in Spanish?
Well, just in case, thank you, Jeremy. So I don't know we don't know if we have Spanish speaker, but in case we do. So la pregunta sería, ¿de dónde usted proviene, dónde usted vive? Y por favor que ubique con el PIN sobre el estado, el territorio o las islas de donde usted vive. Sencillamente haciendo un PIN.
Oh, and we encourage you as we answer more questions, feel free to even respond in your native language. The expectation is whatever you're most comfortable responding in.
Y correcto, van a haber preguntas que van a ser preguntas abiertas, y esas preguntas abiertas usted va a tener la oportunidad de escribir y siéntase en la libertad de escribir en su idioma de preferencia, ya sea español o inglés. No hay ningún problema con eso.
If you're having trouble and the blue dot isn't moving, no problem. Just go ahead, and if you're having that issue, respond in the chat if we're missing you on this map.
Don't be shy. Come on. We have 40 people answering. Vamos, vamos, vamos. Tenemos ya 40, tenemos que llegar a los 70, vamos.
41 out of 70 isn't bad.
Great.
All right.
Apparently, not all of the people are represented there. Maybe.
Right. All right. Well, we've got a pretty good distribution of coastal folks. We're missing out on some colleagues from the interior Southeast and the Virgin Islands, but it's nonetheless exciting to see so many states and Puerto Rico and represented in our audience today. Okay, even though I know most of us are from the resilience occupation, what would you consider your industry that you work in or your occupation?
Por favor, estos son los tipos de preguntas en la cual usted puede responder en el idioma de su preferencia. Si quiere utilizar el español, ¿cuál es su industria o la ocupación? ¿A qué se dedica? ¿Okay? Lo puede escribir en español y va a salir ahí sin ningún problema.
Great. Got a lot of government, extension, emergency planning, resilience.
I saw one that is saying retail.
Oh
That's
yeah, I
pretty
see
cool.
retail too. Wow. Got funder and think tank and consulting. This is a diverse crowd. I think we've got just about every type of planner, manager, and I think we've got a really broad array of different industries and occupations here. The largest words here are the most common. So we see government and management and extension being the most popular answers. So thank you so much for joining us. Your perspectives and kind of positionality with respect to the issue of climate change is really, really important for our chapters. Let's go to the next question. This is an interesting question in kind of what do you remember the most about either the Southeast or the Caribbean chapters?
Por favor, pueda escribir lo que usted recuerda sobre lo que haya leído en el previo capítulo de la evaluación climática para la región del sureste y la región del Caribe. Tiene hasta un máximo de 250 palabras.
Okay, we see some charts, sea level rise. Urban and rural areas. No prior experience. This is something that I've seen in previous surveys that I've done through Mentimeter, is that a lot of people may not be aware of the previous National Climate Assessment, which underscores the importance of expanding the audience that it's accessible to, as Allison mentioned. We're seeing a lot here, sea level rise graphics and maps and tidal flooding stuff. Let me see if I can pause this and keep seeing more of this stuff. Okay, hurricanes, of course, one of the more important climate stressors for Southeast resilience in the Caribbean region. We've got extreme heat, public health. Great, keep in hazard risk. Nighttime temps. All right, there's the timer. Don't feel like you have to rush through these by any means. If you want to, pause and think a bit. Hopefully, we can get even more into this as we learn more about your usage of the previous report. In fact, that's the next question. How did you use the 4th National Climate Assessment chapters for the Southeast and or the Caribbean?
Por favor, respondan y añadan cómo han utilizado los capítulos del sureste de los Estados Unidos y la región del Caribe.
First answer, NA, not applicable.
Big enough.
All right, we've got some education, graphics. I know that I used graphics from the previous in public communication, reference documents, general knowledge. To ground truth efforts. That's a really, I think that's a really interesting, a really interesting perspective and use. I would love to know more about that that ground truthing idea. Educating politicians regularly as a consultant. Oh, there's another closely related to NA is did not. Capacity building. And it's okay to be honest with how you used it. If you did not, you know, feel free to share that with us. If you haven't answered yet, feel free to add detail if there's already one of the answers similar to your own in there. Add some detail if you can. Looks like we've reached maybe saturation on this question, but we're biggest usage was for general knowledge, increasing maybe your understanding of the state of the science related to climate change in our regions. Seeing a lot of that background information as a reference document, communication, presentations. We see a little bit around the specific kind of audience that you might have been engaging with, such as being a consultant or have the educating politicians specifically. And then there's a few of us that admit that there wasn't maybe big usage of it in the previous, during the, or since the last NCA 4. So thank you for sharing this. This is really, really helpful. Why don't we move to more about this, this question, which is, if you were writing our chapters, what would you write about?
En el caso de que si usted tuviese la oportunidad de estar escribiendo los capítulos, próximos capítulos, ¿de qué a usted le gustaría escribir? ¿Sobre qué escribiría?
Tools for the community. Maybe things like grant opportunities or policy tools for the community. It's an interesting feedback. Ooh, heat stress, recurrent flooding, future conditions, equitable, resiliency, nature-based solutions.
Sea Islands vulnerabilities.
Green infrastructure. Ooh, I see a lot of familiar topics here. Funding resiliency, the money question, always an important one. Insurance, rural case studies, especially the Southeast, the rural agricultural history is important. I love all these responses. Keep them coming, folks. I also really am pleased to see that equity is one of the largest and most common answers. This is great. Thank you so much for sharing these things. I see citizen science just popped up. Case studies, human experiences, microclimates, terminology, residential, the proverbial so what. This is wonderful, everybody. Thank you so much. All right, you can keep your answers coming in. Don't be shy. Pablo and I, being chapter leads, can very much appreciate this kind of, almost looking like a shotgun blast of different ideas. But I hope you see that even though they might not be the exact same responses, many of these ideas are following along kind of clusters of different areas. Right, don't feel like you can't keep responding. I think we have one important question here too, is considering how you used the previous, or you would want to use this this update, this new National Climate Assessment. Well, who is your audience for the NCA 5 Southeast and Caribbean chapters?
¿Quién es su audiencia? Si usted estuviese escribiendo el capítulo, es para estos capítulos del sureste y la región del Caribe. ¿Quién usted piensa que puede ser su audiencia principal?
All right, we already see the broad audience that that we expect. Municipalities, elected officials, policymakers, government, general public, voters, planners, managers. There we go. We've got the most common answers are a pretty big split between public and elected officials, people with more specialized knowledge. This is really great. It underscores how important a document such as the 5th National Climate Assessment can be for communicating the state of climate science at this granular level to many different audiences. And this kind of breakdown of all these different types of audiences, begs the appreciation for the way in which we communicate the findings of our chapters. The creative communication element that that Allison alluded to for NCA 5 is so critical, because what that kind of idea of creativity should be able to, through its kind of multifaceted approach, would be accessible to the question is like what would be accessible to both public audiences and elected officials. Hopefully they are of the same mind and find and value the same things in our communities in order to make that work the right way. But we see here, thank you so much for this understanding of the breadth of the different audiences that you foresee using this chapter. Helps Pablo and I, kind of help to generate and advocate and strategically use approaches to communication that will span all of these wonderful communities and audiences that you've identified, from financial institutions to state leaders to public and young people. I even saw young people in there, which is a really, really important aspect of informing the state of climate science for the United States. All right, so at this point, we're gonna switch over to sharing with you what's currently in our zero order drafts, hopefully to show you that we hear you, and in fact, we've kind of already started to do exactly what you're anticipating and what you would like out of this draft. So I will stop sharing my screen and we will do slides now. There we go. Okay, so what's in the Southeast chapter, or let me make sure I'm not going to go over Pablo's time here. What's in our chapter so far? As you know, I'm Jeremy Hoffman. I'm the David and Jane Cohn scientist at the Science Museum of Virginia and the chapter lead for the Southeast. So next slide, please. Want to acknowledge my amazing chapter team for the Southeast. We have a really broad geographic distribution of our author team. The Southeast chapter incorporates 11 states, from Louisiana up to Kentucky, over to Virginia, and down to Florida. So it is a very large place to seek to describe the unique different threats through the lens of a people-centered experience of climate change in the Southeast. So we've assembled what I find to be an extremely talented and an expert author team with representatives from federal agencies like the CDC and FEMA, as well as many of our and EPA, it turns out, and many of our flagship universities and research universities across the Southeast. And I'm from a science museum, which is pretty unique. So all this kind of academic world being brought together by a scientist at a science museum is a pretty unique Southeast chapter team. So if you have any questions about the particulars about these folks, feel free to put them in the chat, or we'll do a Q&A at the end. Next slide, please. The Southeast chapter went through a very similar experience like you did just a few minutes ago. When I met with the author team at the first all-author meeting for our chapter, we did a nearly identical Mentimeter survey as you did. And many of those questions then shaped what happened with the development of our zero order draft. And since we've actually broken our narrative, our zero order draft narrative, into two main parts. One is known as our cross-cutting themes, or these are the sorts of lenses or perspectives that we feel as an author team should be represented and considered throughout the entire chapter. Think of it as like kind of tethers that tie together all of the information that will be presented in what we consider to be key topic areas, which is the other main part of our zero order draft narrative. And these you can think of as our core essentials for the Southeast. These are broad umbrellas of scientific or really like kind of value-based framing around life in the Southeast that are threatened by climate change. So these, anyway, yeah, they're kind of our key topic areas, but we're calling them our core essentials. These are the aspects of life in the Southeast that we feel we can draw this broad umbrella around and that are threatened by various impacts due to climate change. Next slide, please. What are these cross-cutting themes? So remember, I said these are kind of the through lines of action across our entire narrative. This would be things asking the questions such as, how does the history of the Southeast manifest in the present as disproportional climate impacts on limited resource, or otherwise known as frontline communities, those that experience the threats and impacts of climate change first and worst? The second cross-cutting theme is, what have we learned or not learned? Perhaps more importantly, I heard in the previous presentation, you get what you regulate, or you get what you have a permit for, or whatever it is, like the housing kind of design standards for resilience. What have we learned or not learned since 2018, when the previous National Climate Assessment came out? Then a constant theme, a cross-cutting theme for this chapter is, how does climate change affect climate stressors in our region? And the fourth one is, how do Southern identities, all of these different places, all of these different sub-regions of the Southeast, and the cultures that are still there or have been part of the indigenous history of our region, understand and navigate climate stressors in the present day? Then the last cross-cutting theme is really, that maybe I identified only 4 of them. Yes, I guess that is the 4. I said 5 before. Surprise, I meant only 4. Our key areas, or our core essentials, next slide please, would be those kind of, again, broad umbrellas of life in the Southeast that are threatened by climate change. One of those questions is, how is the growth and the demographic change going on in the Southeast affected by or potentially exacerbated by climate change? The second is shelter from the elements. Everyone has to have shelter over their heads in order to, survive and thrive in the face of a climate-related disaster. How does climate-related risk relate to how and where we live? The third one being, we know the connections fairly well between climate stressors and our health and well-being. How is that being experienced by communities in the Southeast, and how might that change into the future? The fourth one is the livelihoods and economy. We have regionally based economies, very growing sectors, sectors that are shrinking. There's a lot of change going on in Southeastern economies. So how does that relate to climate change stressors and multiple impacts? The last one being certainly not the least important, the fifth core essential is the agricultural section of our region and the food systems that it supports, from the kind of access to free lunch at our schools, to the multi-generational families that have held agricultural land in our region for many generations. So this is a very exciting way to organize our chapter. Now, we've also included a basic reference to what has changed since NCA 4. This is a very broad level explanation of the kinds of things that we've seen happening in the literature since NCA 4, several aspects of how extreme heat in our region interacts with human and natural systems, including the detection and attribution of individual heat events, and how history influences residential exposure to heat. The next big area that has changed since NCA 4 in 2018, you can click on the next thing to appear, precipitation. We've learned a lot about both tropical and no-name storms and how they interact with things like stormwater infrastructure and places that are, the hydrology and urban flooding in the Southeast specifically. Then also, how are we using stormwater and agricultural strategies to accommodate these changes in rainfall? We're expecting a big update to sea level rise projections. How does that relate to coastal flooding? How does extreme rainfall and urban flooding on the coast relate to this, and the localized hydrological factors that may impact that sort of flooding pattern? Then we would really like to spend a considerable amount of time assessing the emerging techniques that advance adaptation, mitigation, and resilience, including those that are specifically focused on achieving equity for frontline communities, public health, and urban planning. Then we'd also like to understand a little bit more about the lessons learned or not learned from programs that might be related to things like resettlement and retreat. I believe that's the last what's new. Well, one last one, which is key to our kind of historical conversation and the focus on equity that you all identified, really understanding the recent literature on communities that are disproportionately impacted by climate stressors in the Southeast. So that's what's in the NCA 5.0 order draft for the Southeast chapter. And at this point, I'll hand it over to Pablo, who will share about the Caribbean chapter.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you for the organizer for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. So, and I'm going to be explaining a little bit what we are doing in the Caribbean region with the National Climate Assessment and with this chapter. So, next slide, please. So basically, I think that we are one of the biggest group in the in chapters. So because I think that we are not only writing a chapter, so we are building a team, which is a team responsible of providing the best science available to decision makers and to the communities associated with climate change, right? Or with all of the topics that are most important for the region that are climate change related. So that's one of the reasons why we started building and designing this team following the principle of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's why I would like to start at the very first beginning by describing who we are and the composition of the team that we have. So basically, the Caribbean region might be one of the smallest regions in the U.S. Completely in terms of surface area. But when we're considering the amount of citizens and the number of population that we have, both territory together might have more population than other 26 states in the continental US. So that's an important issue, right? And the other component is that we are very rich in terms of diversity for the region. We have similarities, but we also have differences and particularities. So basically, we are 26 authors. Again, I think that we are one of the biggest groups, if we're not the bigger group in the National Climate Assessment. Mainly females. If you are reading the list, you can go to the next slide, please. So the vast majority from Puerto Rico, obviously, given the size and the population. Puerto Rico is almost 3.2 million people, and the U.S. Virgin Islands is 88,000 people. So the other 15% of our authors are working on mainly in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and the other 35%, go back a little bit, thank you, and the other 35% is working in both territories, so in Puerto Rico and in U.S. Virgin Islands. So we have people from the ecology, infrastructure, energy, water system, water resources, planning, adaptation, equity and justice, and community adaptation as well. So we have a very diverse group in terms of topics as well. Can you go to the other one? As I mentioned, we are a very diverse group, culturally speaking. We have also particularities and uniqueness. For instance, in the case of Puerto Rico, we have almost the population in Puerto Rico is mainly Hispanic Latino. So we are Spanish speakers, even though most of us can speak also 2 languages. While in the Virgin Islands, the population is mainly Afro-Caribbean descendant, and they're English speaker mainly. Although we recognize that they have also Creole, and in San Croix, for example, they have Spanish speakers that are migrants that are coming from other islands. In the case of Puerto Rico is mainly composed by one big island with 2 other small islands that are populated as well, but not that much as in the U.S. Virgin Islands. So the U.S. Virgin Islands are mainly 3 islands separately, and it's a pretty well distributed, right? We do share similarities, such as geographic isolation, which is something very important. When I heard, for example, during this morning discussion, that geographic isolation is an extremely important issue for disaster response, right? After a hurricane, for example, we cannot wait even for a ship to get nearby the region, because still the weather is not able to go sailing, right? For example, and in the case of the airports, are also blocked. and we are not connected by land, so it's impossible to receive any kind of response by trains or trucks or vehicles or by roads, right? We share similar political status. We both are territories without any right to vote in the United States, and we're facing similar climate hazards such as powerful hurricanes, drought, extreme heat, sea level rise, coastal flood, but yet posing different kind of threat because we have different vulnerabilities, right? And for instance, for example, vulnerability is also associated with some social determinants. And in the case of social determinants, poverty is one of the main drivers, right, for vulnerability. And in the case of Puerto Rico, for example, we have 48% of our population living below the poverty level, while if we compare it with the Virgin Islands, they only have 15 to 17% of the population living below the poverty level. Both territories are losing population and a lot of migration due to multiple other factors, not necessarily climate related, but some of them can be partially attributable to extreme weather event, as it happened in 2017 during the hurricane season of the of Hurricane Maria and Hurricane Irma. Okay. In terms of the composition, again, we have, but the vast majority of our authors are coming from academia, almost 60% of them, followed by the public sector, but mainly federal agency. We don't have too much local agencies from the state or the municipal level working in the national climate assessment. And we have a few NGOs. Next, please. Next slide. Thank you. So we do have tentative goal, although I need to acknowledge that we are modifying this goal because we actually had our engagement workshop last week, and considering all of the comments that we heard out of the workshop, one of them is that we should be able to highlight the uniqueness and the particularity of the region in the goals, right? And one of the things that we're looking forward is to include some of the keywords and language to highlight that kind of uniqueness that we have. For example, we need to say that we're islands, that we had that geographic isolation, and what that means in terms of preparedness, adaptations, and mitigation for climate change. Next slide, please. So after 4 months working together in that discussion and conversation with the group, the author team identified 5 main topics or priorities for the region. The first one is again, with no particular order. The first one is human health, quality of life, and well-being. Water and food insecurity. Please note that we're calling it insecurity for island regions. Ecology and biodiversity, which is something that we need to speak on more on that behalf because we received a couple of comments on that topic. Infrastructure and energy, planning and adaptation. Next slide, please. So basically, the zero order draft is available in the webpage as Jeremy was mentioning as well. We are happy to receive comments from you. So the opportunity to submit public comment is open until February 20, 2022. So if for whatever reason you were unable to be to join us during the meeting, the engagement workshop that we had last week, you should have the opportunity to go into the webpage. Although I need to recognize also, as far as I heard from the participants, that it's a little bit complicated to navigate inside of the webpage, and a lot of registrations and a lot of things that in some cases is difficult for participants. But again, I'm encouraging you to please go there and see and read the zero order draft that we have for the Caribbean region. I'm not going to go into all of the details that we have here. Next slide, please. Obviously, we are including in the human health, we're including all of the components for social determinants of health, excess mortality that are associated with extreme weather events, such as it happened with the mortality after Hurricane Maria. In the key topic of water and food insecurity, obviously, this is an important component, the food and water nexus for the Caribbean region. We're suffering drought. We have a lot of limitation in terms of land surface and a lot of problem on nutrition, because not of all of the we're importing almost 90% of our products, and that's an important issue when we're talking about on adaptation. Next slide, please. So the other one is ecology and biodiversity, and how is associated also with the impact of climate change, but not only how this climate change is impacting on or affecting the ecology and the biodiversity locally, but also the ecosystem services and all of the services that we are receiving from the ecosystem, right? In terms of provisioning, supporting, cultural, and regulating. Those kind of things are going to be well considered in this topic as well. Next slide. So for infrastructure and energy, so obviously the increased demand for some services that strain the system, for example, the heat impact that we're observing in Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands, that is also increasing the energy demand. And in some cases, the energy system doesn't have the capacity to provide, and this is just an example, but the energy system doesn't have the capacity to satisfy the demand when heat increase during the summertime in Puerto Rico. That's an evidence, and it's getting worse after Hurricane Maria because the system is so fragile and so vulnerable that all of a sudden is unable to satisfy the demand during hot seasons in Puerto Rico. Because of that, the government of Puerto Rico declared a state of emergency for energy in September 2021 in Puerto Rico. So it's an important component, and in this case, not only energy is going to be considered under the infrastructure, but we're going to be speaking about also how to include the water system into this topic. Next slide. And planning and adaptation, of course, governance and adaptation is a huge component that we are lacking in this area. So together, for example, as it happened in Puerto Rico during Hurricane Maria. So not only extreme weather events are enhancing or promoting migration to the continental US, but also the climate extreme weather events interacting with the lack of adaptation actions or the lack of adaptation strategies in the region. So limited human and institutional capacity is another component that is going to be discussed in this part. And again, I'm not going to be going around all of the different subtopics that we would like to discuss in each of the topics, but I will encourage you to go and visit the webpage and please make the public comments. And you can do it in Spanish and English. Next slide, please. Next slide. We did our engagement workshop. I'm going to be doing this in 3 minutes. We did our engagement workshop last week, no, Wednesday, actually. And what we have is that at the beginning, we had 255 participants registered using the webpage, but only almost 105 came into the meeting. And we did a couple of questions as well as similar as the one as we were doing here. And most of the participants were unable to read the zero order draft before the meeting to have the discussion. Some of the difficulties were associated because it was difficult to navigate and to get access, or they didn't receive any instructions on how to get to the zero order draft. Another one was the language. So this zero order draft was mainly in English, and we don't have a Spanish translation version yet for the zero order draft. Next slide, please. So the vast majority was aware that the National Climate Assessment 4 existed, but the vast majority haven't had the time to read it yet, or for whatever reason, they didn't read it. So almost 60% of the participants were unable to read it. So that's another thing to be considered. So hopefully we give them the opportunity to do that by telling them that this kind of document is there, that is needed to be read before to comment on the zero order draft. It's not mandatory, but it's recommended. Next slide, please. So the participants that we have were coming basically from, so it was very representative on the topics that we were identifying prior to the workshop. So we were, in that case, our topics were pretty much well covered with the participants in the workshop. Next slide. They find out mainly by email and some other because of the friends. So some friends telling them, so we need to think about the outreach material and how we are communicating this kind of efforts if we want to reach more or to increase participation in the communities, decision makers, or practitioners. Next slide. So the takeaways, language is a barrier. So some of the things that we heard that were critical for the participants to do comments into the zero order draft is that we need to be able to provide a Spanish version of the zero order draft. So not only to wait to translate the report one is finished, but also to be able to have a Spanish version during all of the processes, so the people can have the ability and the flexibility to read it, to quite well understand what they're reading, and to make the comments. We need to be, some of the suggestion is that if we are thinking on how to modify some of the languages and the keyword, for example, ecology and biodiversity, they were not saying that this is something wrong, but they're saying that it sounds too positive. So maybe what we would like to say is that there is a critical habitat and species that is being under threat by climate change, right? we need to enforce and to enhance the regional coordination. So we need to better improve in that component and emphasis on intersectionality. So all of us understand that we're not working on silos. So the 5 main topics that we are showing in this presentation is not, we are not intending to say that they are autonomous or independently. So we understand that all of them are interconnected in somehow. So the audience is asking us to better explain on how each of these different topics are interconnected and interrelated. And that's a challenge, but we need to do that. So intersectionality is very important because again, we're not working in silos. And the next slide, and I think that I'm finished. So that's it. Thank you so much, and gracias a todos por su participación durante la tarde de hoy. Gracias.
Great, and Jeremy, I'm handing controls back over to you then.
Great. Let's, all right, let's get over here. There it is. Show this window. All right, we're gonna rejoin the Mentimeter and get some final feedback from you on how we did. You can use your QR code. Maybe you left the window open before. So if you would, please rejoin the Mentimeter, menti.com. The code is 8854-7569. And we'll go through, actually, probably because we have only a few minutes left, why don't we go straight to the Q&A, which is, or maybe one of these questions. Please find your way back in here. Let's go through here these statements. These are a rate your agreement statement questions. So if you would drag the indicator on each one of these statements to indicate your level of agreement, from strongly disagree on the left to strongly agree on the right. The statements are, I feel that the topics presented by the author teams, here me and Pablo, align with my values. The second is that I feel that the topics presented by the author teams reflect my concerns about climate change in these regions. Then I feel that the stakeholders that you identified in our survey earlier will find these topics relevant and insightful. And then the biggest one here at the bottom is that you feel that what we've presented, Pablo and I, will advance the conversation around climate change in my region.
Let me go very quickly in case that you are not understanding in English. So, la primera viene siendo que por favor califique su acuerdo con ¿qué tan de acuerdo está usted con estas declaraciones? Si estos temas que se presentaron por los autores, tanto Jeremy como yo, se alinean con sus valores. La segunda parte es, si usted piensa que los temas que se presentaron por los autores, tanto Jeremy como yo, reflejan las preocupaciones que ustedes tienen con respecto a cambio climático. La tercera es si ustedes piensan que los stakeholders, los tomadores de decisiones y los practicantes pueden encontrar que estos temas son relevantes y prácticos. ¿Okay? Y la última es si ustedes piensan que estos tópicos, estos temas presentados por los autores pueden adelantar el diálogo y la conversación en temas de cambio climático para las regiones que hemos presentado.
Feel free to continue answering, and we'll give you just another second or two here because I understand the session ends here at 2:15. Very encouraged by this feedback. Thank you very much. These are very high scores, and we appreciate very much your perspective. Now, why don't we go ahead and switch over to Q&A? You can put them directly into the Mentimeter or submit them through the chat feature on the GoToWebinar.
Por favor, alguna pregunta que puedan tener en español o en inglés la pueden presentar aquí para los autores o lo pueden hacer en el chat del GoToWebinar.
Oh, and also, if you have any questions for Allison Crimmins, the director of the National Climate Assessment as well.
Cualquier pregunta para Jeremy, yo o Alison también, que es la directora del programa.
We did such a good job, Pablo and Allison, that we left no stone unturned. And so no questions means it's perfect, and we can.
Too much information in a short period of time.
Yeah.
I don't see either any questions. We just have a comment that it was a great session. I would like to thank you, Paulo, Jeremy, and Alison, for your precise and punctual presentations, and obviously to have the feedback from the participants and their inputs for these important sessions. So we're gonna be moving for a break, and we will be returning about 15 minutes for our next session. Thank you very much to all of you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.